Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER Pod. I'm your host, Faye, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women paving bold paths. This week's guest is Elissa Sagoskin, head coach of Israel's national flag football team. For Elissa, sports has always been more than a pastime, they're a part of who she is. Now she's channeling that passion into coaching and representing Jewish female athletes on the world stage with her sights set on the 2028 Olympics. Elissa is also a mother to her son Amichai, who has cerebral palsy, and through him, she learned to flip the script on how we see bodies, movement, and minds. She challenges us to celebrate different ways of being in the world, reminding us that she doesn't see disability, she sees ability. Let's dive in. Elissa, welcome to the Trailblazer Pod. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's great to
My
be here.
pleasure. So, I want to start from the very beginning. You grew up
Sure.
in Philadelphia?
I did.
Okay.
Go
Can you
Phillies.
talk to me a little, go Phillies. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you were like as a kid and how it was growing up there?
Sure. I'll be honest. I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia,
Okay.
a place called Yardley, Pennsylvania. It's about a half hour outside of Philadelphia. So when I say I'm from Philly, I'm from a suburb of Philly,
To me, it's the
but
same.
exactly. So it was thank God it was it was a good childhood. I have three sisters, and we're all into different things. Parents have always, been super supportive of whatever we're into and hobbies and talents and things like that. I'd say obviously from a very young age, I got into sports and athletics.
Yeah.
I definitely took that seriously. And I think in general, as a kid, I was definitely a kid and had fun and went out and, enjoyed my time. But I think I had like an intensity about
Hmm.
anything that I was doing, I was approaching with a seriousness and responsibility and wanting to feel that I was putting in effort and being able to like feel accomplishment.
Wow.
So that was definitely something that it certainly has served me. But also growing up with four sisters, they're gonna nag on you and
Yeah.
make fun of you for that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it was great. If you think of like a typical like suburban upbringing in America, I was out playing with the neighbors, riding bikes. It was great. Thank God.
Wow. Was this seriousness that you had, is this your personality or is kind of what was going on in your family with everybody?
No, I think it's part of my personality. Meaning, I don't see myself as a overly serious person. I think I just when I approach things
Yeah.
and I want to get them done and accomplished, I think that's probably it was probably pretty entertaining for my parents as like a little kid when you see a little kid taking things potentially seriously and then probably trying to balance that out a little bit. I see kind of like the opposite right now with my own son and how he approaches things. And I actually appreciate that he's not as serious. He tells me, don't worry, don't worry. Yeah, so I can appreciate that. So I think it's just again like kind of seeing certain things in one's personality, cultivating that, but also trying to find that balance.
Yeah.
So like I said, I don't think it was like overly serious or overly anxious or overly stressed. It's just when I approach things, I wanted to do it in a way that I felt good about and comfortable with. But I had fun, and it was
Yeah.
like all in the spirit of doing things that you enjoy and that you're good at, and wanting to take that seriously.
I totally get that. So, what drew you to sports specifically?
When you do something, whether any type of hobby or something that you pick up, and you just feel like this feels right.
Hmm.
Like being able to catch a ball for me was kind of just like breathing. Like you just do it, like you can do it. And feeling, when later on as I started playing softball, I got into basketball, which really became my main sport. It just was like very instinctual, and
Wow.
it kind of just felt like it was like part of you. And I loved the healthy side of competition. I love the challenge of going out there and competing against people, of being on the smaller side, but using my advantages, disadvantages, like turning them into advantages. I loved being able to just to go out there and use that as like express myself through that. And it all came like very naturally, and it was very fun. And a way just to kind of like as I got older, kind of just also develop more of your personality and understand, how you approach things, how you approach challenges, how you approach stress, how you approach pressure situations, and how you relate to other people in those situations. So it started out as just being very fun, and it always is fun. That's, at the end of the day, that's why I do it. And if you put me out on a basketball court now, it's going to be hard for me to leave. So
Oh,
it's just fun
yeah.
for me.
I love that. And I find it so cool that something that you enjoyed as a little kid, it evolved with you through your life. Like it changed from, playing and then becoming a leader in sports. And that's why I always ask people about their childhood because, there's sometimes it's a very linear path and sometimes it's kind of like you're putting together those pieces. But I love understanding where it comes from. And even the way you're talking about it, I can see your passion, like thinking about you as a little kid playing. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think there's so many it's we change and evolve as we grow up and we get older and we mature and we have so many different experiences. But I think for me, like the one thing that has like kind of just been like this,
Yeah.
thread line is being involved in sports, and it gives me great comfort, to like
Yeah.
also as much as we change, there's a part of us that kind of always stays the same.
Yeah.
And I think I'm always just going to be that girl in, like, just ready to go out and, anytime, like you're ready to like play a game, let's go.
Yeah.
I've got my, basketball shorts on, t-shirt, I'm ready to go. Let's go.
I very much relate to that. I've been doing horseback riding since I'm like 8 or 9, and I did
Nice.
shows, and I'm still doing it today. And it's just like kind of like as natural as breathing for me, like you're saying. It's one of those things that just keeps coming back into my life in different stages, and even when I take a pause, it's always coming back, and it just is like people at the barn say it's like a gene. You have the gene or you don't have the gene. And that's kind of, so
Exactly.
I totally hear what you're saying. So before we like delve into more of that, I want to, Jewish podcast, so I want to understand like how Judaism played a role in your life growing up.
Sure. So it played a very prominent role, potentially a little bit different than some other paths,
Mhm.
people grow up with. For most of my life, I grew up in a religious home, but my parents together decided that they would kind of take a journey in Judaism when we were younger,
Mm.
and they started becoming more religious. So there was a time in my life when I was younger, I can remember not being, we weren't a religious family.
Mm.
And slowly, as my parents, kind of learned more and began to kind of enter this lifestyle, obviously their kids being young, followed in those
Yeah.
footsteps. And I can remember going from public school to a Jewish day school, and just kind of making those different changes and watching my parents kind of negotiate that and navigate that in their own professional and personal lives. But I think one of the things that I really value is, we were talking about sports, but whatever hobbies or talents or whatever their daughters were into, that never stopped. It was always, you can like
Yeah.
you combining those things. It didn't have to be one or the other. There was clearly a line that they drew, and set that example. But it was very much, this is still part of your life. And certainly being a woman playing sports in the Jewish religious community,
Yeah.
that's not something that often you see, that could mesh together well. But I really appreciate, what that messaging that my parents provided us with was keep doing what you want to do
Wow.
and add these values that they're trying to instill in us. So I think that was extremely important.
That's really special. And I just, Allison, who told me about you, she's talking about the same thing. She's like, now that I'm thinking about Judaism more, how am I integrating the values, adding it on top of sport? Like, it's not necessarily contradicting. So I love that you kind of alluded to the same thing is like, how do you bring your personal values to the thing that you love? And I think it's really special that your parents fostered that. And I talk a lot about integration on the podcast all the time because I think as women, like, sometimes we feel like, we have these separate parts of ourselves because we're so multifaceted and it takes, at least for me speaking personally, it's such a journey to learn how to integrate those parts of yourself or myself. And as I talk to women like you on the podcast, it's really giving me insights and tools to kind of learn to do it myself. So a big thing.
Well, I mean, it's always a learning process. It's
Yeah,
not, it
for sure.
doesn't, it doesn't stop. And like I said, it's kind of, comforting to see those things kind of travel through your life as things change and evolve.
Yeah,
Those are things that you can kind of depend on and feel comfortable with and settled in to a certain
definitely.
extent.
So at what point did you move to Israel?
So I moved to Israel after I finished my first degree. I went to the University of Maryland, and after I finished my first degree there, I came to Israel. I'd been there, I'd spent some time both in high school and in college in Israel. And my junior year of college, I was here in Israel, and then went back, finished, and then came back as soon as I graduated. That was something that being part of, when going to Jewish day schools, having a more Zionistic upbringing, and really feeling my time here that this was a place where I wanted to be, feeling that it was a place that I connected to in terms of obviously the people and the history that you're a living part of, and feeling that there's what to contribute to. So that certainly fueled the move that I made, and was able to do that in a hopefully in a productive way.
Yeah. So what was your degree that you got?
My first degree was in communications, and then I did a second degree also in communication once I was in Israel at Hebrew U. I don't necessarily work in that field. I have my own personal training business. So, but again, it was an important experience to go through that. Obviously, any part of education is going to prepare you for what you eventually want to do, and messaging and understanding that. But that's what I studied.
Yeah, it's funny. It's also a big theme on the podcast is like, are you doing what you thought you were gonna do? And most of the time it's not. And I love that
Yeah.
because I'm not using really my degree in a concrete way. And when I started this, I thought I was like the only one. And then everyone is saying like, no, I don't use my degree, and it makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience and what I know, like, if you, unless you're going for something like so specific,
Right.
and especially in the liberal arts, you're using the skills and kind of like this like diverse,
Yeah.
broad education to apply to what you're going to be
Right.
doing. And then again, at 20, 21, 22 years old, do you really know what pathway that you're going to take? And there's so many other experiences that happen from that point until when you actually figure it out. Whatever you studied as your first degree, especially in the States, when you're 18 years old going into university or college, I'm not sure if it's realistic to choose exactly what you want to do, or even kind of like necessary.
Yeah, very, very well said. So so you come to Israel, how do you get into the coaching and then back into, you're starting in a new country? Like, how'd you get into sports there?
So, I the opportunities kind of come to you. I was playing a little bit of basketball for a while. I just through different friends who I knew, they knew I played sports, and they connected me with one person who connected to me another. And then I kind of got involved with that. And I played basketball for a little while I was here. And then what happened was my sister directly below me also lives here in Israel, and she also is into sports. And we grew up playing together and against each other. Um, but she had a friend who knew that we both played sports, and she told my sister about this flag football league that they were starting in Jerusalem for women. And again, just always being involved in sports, knowing that, at any, it could be a fun experience. We didn't really play football growing up. We certainly were familiar with it, kind of threw the ball around in the backyard, but nothing more than that. We said, okay, sure, like we'll go to this league and we'll see what it's all about. And we went and we started playing. And at the same time, there was a coach there for the national women's team. And he kind of approached us and said, hey, do you guys want to try out for the team? And we actually had no idea what he was talking about. We're like, what are you talking about? What's flag football anyway? Are you saying like it exists outside, like, just like in American culture? And what we learned was that it actually does.
Wow.
And this was going back a number of years, and if we look at where flag football is today, it's exponentially grown. But even at that point, it was a growing sport that was being played globally, where there were international teams being formed, and we would go to these tournaments and play. And that's how I got involved with it. And I've been involved with it for a very long time. And coming into a country where, I have my sister here, but we don't have any other family, that team and that structure really did become my family. And I have got amazing friends, and had just privileged experiences being able to train with them, play with them, and travel all over the world, really representing Israel and representing it through sport, which is something I've been so
Yeah.
into and passionate about my whole life.
That's so cool. It is funny how life happens sometimes. How would you describe yourself as a player versus a coach?
I think as a player, individual player, I bring that intensity of, and work ethic of I'm just going to, rep after rep after rep, and
Yeah.
push and push and push. And also expecting the same thing of my teammates, of really, putting it in, because we're kind of like all in this together. As a coach, I think I am like that, but I also feel I've learned a little bit more. about how I push myself is not going to be how someone else pushes themselves, or where they have to go emotionally to get to that
Yeah.
place. It's not just you snap your fingers and you're going to do it. So I think it's kind of like it's just growth and maturity and understanding that that mentality, the commitment, the work ethic needs to be there in order to succeed. But as a coach, my job is to tap into each individual player to get that out of them in a way that I'm not going to do it. That's not the way I'm going to do it.
Right.
And certainly, like I'm still learning that, and being a mom
Mm.
helps me understand that way more now. But it's finding. I think as a coach, you've got to find a way to be impactful to your players, and you've got to see them and understand them. And I think as an athlete, as a player, and as a teammate, like you relate to them, but not on that level. You're kind of
Yeah.
looking at them at the same place of, well, if I'm doing this, why can't you do this? And you expect that. And again, like I said, I expect that
Yeah.
out of my players, but I've got to reach them and impact them in a different way, each
Yeah.
one of them.
I feel like that's so hard because just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're good at teaching it. And on one hand, it does give you an advantage because you know what it's like to actually play. But on the other hand, just it doesn't mean that you actually know how to lead the team. And I think it's really cool that you went from being the player to the coach. But also, do you find that as a coach, it's also impacting the way you think about playing for yourself?
I think it goes both ways. I know as a player what I need to do to find success, and I know how to work and do that. And I try to impart that and set an example. Like you said, I think one of the things that my players can relate to is that I've been there,
Right.
right? When we go to a tournament and you're playing on the international stage, and you're looking around and you're anxious, your nerves are getting the best of you.
Yeah.
I've been there, so let me, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can help you
Yeah.
through that. I know what that's like. It does go both ways, but in the moment right now, I'm more in coach mode than player
Mhm.
mode. So how does
Yeah.
it affect me?
Right.
Um, as a player, I'm not sure. I still have that same mentality when I approach my individual training,
Yeah.
of just what my work ethic is, being extremely consistent with it, putting in the work. I want to be able to set that example for my players. But again, also understanding that my players aren't me. They're gonna
Right.
find their success in their way. I can't impose my will in that way. It's got to be a conversation, and it's got to be impactful in that way where we're working together and I can help and I want to be able to help. And I also want them to kind of take the lead for themselves as well.
Yeah, I feel like I would struggle a little bit like with that. Like even when I have people like when you book a service and they're doing something and they're not getting back to me the way I would want them to, I'm always like, "Oh, why aren't you doing it this way?" It's such a hard thing for me that I'm working through now, but we're working on it. Um
Yeah, yeah.
when people talk about company cultures and organizational cultures, and I'm curious how that feeds into like a team in sports. Like, is there a team culture you try to create?
No, team culture is extremely important, and that starts, from the top down, working with the coaches and the captains and the
Mm,
veteran players to the new players and how they come in and see what's going on, like that feeling that they're
yeah.
getting of what it is that we're trying to do here and accomplish. So obviously, foundationally, we talk, like as I've just been talking about now, commitment and work ethic and responsibility, accountability, all those things play into what it is of the general feeling and that you're trying to create. But I would say also, the culture that I'd strive to create is kind of like a culture of impact. Because ultimately, what we are doing as coaches and players is we're trying to make a difference in our sport. But I think also as women and Jewish women playing sport,
Yeah.
what are we representing here? And what impact do we want to have? What impact do I want to have on my players? What impact do my players want to have on younger generations coming
Right.
up? What's the example that they want to set as these strong Jewish athletic women, and what that message is and what that means and represents to the greater kind of
Yeah.
community that we're all coming from. So I think it's all those traditional parts of accountability, commitment, work ethic. But I think when I look at my team, I want to say, well, how are we impacting each other, and how are we then impacting the community around us?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I think that's so beautiful the way you phrase it. Like it's so many layers. It's sports, it's women in sports, which is a whole different beast, and then it's Jewish women in sport. You guys are trying to make it to the 2028 Olympics. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about like what are the challenges if you're facing any challenges and like what are you most excited about?
Well, there's no challenges. It's a smooth ride. That's always how it goes. That's how everything goes. It's just a
You're
smooth
right.
ride. Um, we faced a lot of challenges. First, as long as I've been playing this game, flag football or football in general in Israel is still a developing, growing sport.
Yeah.
And the culture of women's sports in Israel and girls playing sports in Israel is still developing and growing.
Interesting.
So there's a learning curve, that we experience of also teaching the game, actually introducing the game, and then developing talent here in Israel.
Mm.
So our pool of players is small. We don't have the type, we're not drawing from thousands or hundreds of thousands
Right.
of players. We're drawing from a very small community of players. So that's one, developing, promoting the sport and developing the sport among girls and women. And we're doing that, but it's got to be, we've got a long way to go with that in terms of our own homegrown talent that's here. We have some very talented players that are here, and what we find in terms of how we can build the sport and or our team to the strongest level that we can, knowing that the sport is growing and the level is extremely high right now, which is amazing to see in the sport. What's great about Israel is that it obviously represents the state, but there's a representation of the entire Am Yisrael, of the
Right.
Jewish nation. So we're looking at also Jewish players coming from abroad, from the States, from Canada, who have been playing this game and been playing it for potentially longer than our players have been playing here, have a little bit more experience, like Ali,
Yeah.
and have them come in and integrate with the team and be part of it. So that's part of our building. That's one of the challenges of how do we find players, how do we develop the game, and continue developing that talent. That's one challenge. With any growing sport, developing sport, and especially in women's sports, there's a challenge of funding and resources, and that's always, that's I think that's probably across the board for,
Yeah.
for whatever it is that you're going to do. That's the stumbling block or the obstacle that you're going to come into. But I think it's continuously stressing the need for women and young girls to have a place to play, which is extremely important, not just because they're playing flag football, but because of what sports does and what we're able to do, and the skills you're able to develop through sports that can help you in life.
Yeah.
We see right now globally across the world that the number of girls that we see it in two different directions. The number of women and successful women that we see across the board in various professions. A lot of them have played sports, and they play sports at a high level.
Yeah.
And then on the opposite direction, what we see is girls dropping off playing sports when they reach like kind of like the adolescent age, 12, 13 years old, because they get a little self-conscious, they're not sure, they don't have that confidence, or potentially they think maybe this isn't socially the best thing to do. So looking at those two ends of the spectrum and understanding really the positive impact that girls playing sports can have, then we can talk about, well, why are the resources and funding necessary? Well, it's necessary because of that, not just to succeed and win games. We're trying to produce and develop young women so that they can be the next leaders. And I
Yeah.
think that really happens. It doesn't have to happen through sports, but sports is a perfect breeding ground for that.
Yeah, I feel like awareness is so important here because like if not for having Ali on the podcast, I wouldn't really know that this is something that Israel's team is trying to do. I wouldn't know much about the ins and outs, and I feel like most people don't, right? Like also I grew up religious and so sports wasn't something that my community did. And so I don't even have that not like background knowledge of that, right? And I'm like almost 30 and the fact that I'm learning about this at 30, says something. So smooth ride like you're saying, right?
All smooth. It's all
Yeah, yeah.
smooth for sure. But again, we see them as challenges, but not roadblocks. And being
Right.
able to kind of, this is what you're passionate about. This is what you want to do. Let's find a way to do that. So we have a smaller pool of players. How do we continue to develop, and how do we bring in more players that can help the program develop. A player like Ali coming over to Israel, training not only with the team, but also our younger players, watching that and seeing that and learning from that is going to be really helpful to our program. So again, it's looking at the challenge and then trying to figure out what that solution is.
Yeah. Spoken like a true leader. Well, I'm excited to see what happens. Obviously, we still got a couple years, but good luck with
Yeah,
that. We were talking earlier about integrating and having different parts of ourselves, and you have your business, you're a coach, but you're also a mom, and you have your son Amichai, right?
Amichai, yeah.
Okay, and he has cerebral palsy, and this is a whole other layer of your life, and I love that you're so open about it, and you're really vulnerable about the experience. And so, first, can you share what cerebral palsy is, like for those of us who don't know?
Sure. Yeah. So cerebral palsy, or CP, is really an umbrella term that is referring to neurological disorders that come from some injury to the brain or some damage to the brain that affects muscle movement, coordination, balance, stability. And there are various types. There are hundreds of types of CP, and how that plays out in each individual is very different. So the type of CP that my son has, he's hemiplegic. That means one side of his body is affected. My son had a stroke at some time around his birth. Don't know when exactly, don't know why. Everything, thank God, was normal, healthy up until he was born. He was born right on time. It's extremely rare to have a baby full term go through a stroke. So what happened was he had this stroke, and it affected the left side. The stroke was on the left side of his brain, so therefore it affected the right side of his
Mm.
body. So it's harder for him to. He has high muscle tone on the right side of his body, and how that plays out is that he has a harder time using his right hand. He uses it more as a helper hand. It's definitely functional, but it's harder for him to hold things, to grasp. And he walks asymmetrically, so he has a brace, but he's extremely independent. He walks, he talks, he runs. He does jujitsu. He swims, and thank God he's he's a healthy, curious, funny, goofy kid.
Wow. First of all, I watched your TEDx video and I read your blog, and just so beautiful how you talk about him and your journey with it. And so I want to talk a little bit about your journey specifically. You were saying that, and it's really interesting. As an athlete, you had this like huge fear of, disability, and I can understand why, because your body is everything when you're an athlete. But can you talk to me about that fear prior to having him, and then how that perception changed over time, seeing him kind of evolve and grow up and doing all the things he's
Sure.
capable of doing?
Yeah. So I think in general, at least the way that I grew up, and it's not saying anything negative or bad. I wasn't around a lot of people with disability. I wasn't exposed to it a lot. I didn't see it a lot. And then being an athlete and kind of relying on your body to work the way that it should. And not only that, training in a specific way, training perfectly to perform perfectly was something that I'd worked my entire life for. And the thought of not being able to use your body in a way that you wanted to, or being somehow held back by something, that was scary to me.
Yeah.
That was scary. And I think if we're all honest with ourselves, if we haven't been exposed to disability and we see someone with disability, oftentimes, you know, it's it can be a little jarring. We're not really sure what to do, how to react. Do we help? Do we not help? Sometimes disability is difficult. I'll be very transparent. Sometimes it's difficult visually, and you're not exactly sure what's going on. And those are difficult moments, and they can be scary. And I think that I'm okay saying that now, because I've been exposed to a lot of different things and been able to see that and see through that. But I think that it's okay first to say, yeah, it's a little scary. It's a little scary, and especially coming from my background of really, being involved in that physical side of things and thinking, well, what if I couldn't do that? What would that mean? So I think that was before I had Amichai, that was certainly something that I wasn't exposed to and I was scared of.
Yeah. I mean, it makes so much sense. I'm really weird. I always think about like what happens if I, can't use my legs? Like, would I be able to ride? That's just my brain. That's how I work all the time. But I think most people, it doesn't cross their mind. Like they walk, they talk, they do all the things, and it is this like unknown thing in their life. It's like, how do I approach this, right? So I want to quote you because just the way you wrote this was so beautiful. So you said, it's about Amichai running. You write, they must surely see the brace on his right leg. The thing is, that's okay because Amichai has cerebral palsy after all. In fact, I want people to see this too. I want people to see CP. And I'm curious, was this something that you were so conscious about, like creating this visibility because of exactly what you were talking about? You didn't have that growing up or before him?
I think so, but also one, I'm extremely proud of Amichai. Um, it did CP, the way that I looked at it, and the blog that I used to write on, I called it Change Perceptions, which is CP. And I felt, I mean, that's what Amichai challenged me to do from day one or day five. That's when, we found out,
Yeah.
what was happening, what this was all about. And there were more questions than there were answers, because when you have a brain injury, especially with a baby, the brain is still developing. So many of the questions that I asked, the answer was, I don't know. We don't know yet. We'll have to see how he develops. But every day since then, I've just seen Amichai with his own motivation, his own resilience, his own determination. And I've seen him do whatever it is that he wants to do, but he does it in his way. And I think that what happened over time was I didn't see disability. I saw ability. And I want people to see that. I want people to see that you can move in a different way. You can think in a different way. You can do whatever it is that you want in a different way that might be defined as a disability, but it's not. When Amichai runs down the street and the people see him and he's running and he always has to race me. It's always let's go, we're racing. Um, and people they look at him and they call out, they say, Aloof, you're a champion. And it's not because they're watching a kid run in a brace. I think they're watching a kid run with confidence and he's free and he's happy and he happens to be wearing a brace. And I want people to see that. I want people to understand that the disability, that aspect of it that I was so scared of growing up, or even as an adult, even up until I had Amichai, is something that can be looked at in such a different way, in such a positive way, and looking at people's strengths and what they're bringing instead of you know what something looks like. And I think that that's really important to me. Now, Amichai's growing up; he's 12 years old now, thank God. What will be important to him, what messages that he wants to send, that's up to him. But I'm very proud of the fact that he walks around and he knows his story, he has his narrative, but he also knows I'm going to do what I want to do.
I love it. I think it's such a powerful thing for life, even take away disability. Like everyone thinks they need to do things a certain way because that's the norm, and it's just something that we can all learn from. Like just because you don't do it the way somebody else does it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just your way. So I think it goes even
Absolutely.
beyond, physical
Absolutely.
disabilities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. You're talking about in your TEDx speech or talk, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
about the concept of powering through and how that was like that's what you did your whole life and motherhood and having him change that perspective. And I think this is a really important conversation to have because I think I talk about this a lot on the podcast. Like, as women, I always feel like we're finally being given a chance and we're finally being given a seat at the table and we can, we recognize that we can do things. And when things don't necessarily go the way we want to, or, something's going wrong or we don't have the same strength, it's like we feel like we're not allowed to take that break or admit because then what? Like are we losing it, right? At least that's how I feel. And so this is a very, you know, relatable thing I'm always powering through, and I listening to you, it's just like it offers another perspective and a much healthier perspective. And so can you share like how you learned that necessarily wasn't the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say I'm not perfect at it. I think there's many moments, and if you ask my husband, he might disagree that I just generally just tend to power through things.
Yeah.
And I think there's a time and a place for that. I think when certain
Right.
things have to get done, and or you're looking to accomplish something, and you just you've got your blinders on. I think there's a time and a place for that, and it's a real advantage to be able to focus in and do that and say, I'm doing it no matter
Yeah.
what. And like I said, that can really serve you. What I've learned is that there's certain moments where it's not going to serve you. And certainly one of those moments that I learned that was when Amichai was born. Just saying, okay, I'm just going to get through this
Yeah.
and it's going to be fine. It's going to be good. Don't worry. Like it, and not really process that, not take in like that fear
Yeah.
and the anxiety that comes with a really jarring, unexpected event and diagnosis. So you had to kind of like let that come through and be in kind of like sit with it and not power through that. Not just say it's going to be fine. I'm just going to get to work and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and because you don't know.
Right.
And I think it was in one of that was one of the moments where I said I can't just power through this. I can't just say okay, put my head down, go to work, and I had to really honestly allow it to come in and accept that this happened. And for all the implications, did I do something? All the questions that you had, was it something that I did? Was it something, that, again, looking at going over all the details, I was at the gym the day before, I went into
Yeah.
labor, even though I knew those weren't the end. This
Right.
happened. It
Yeah.
happened. It wasn't my plan. But what I think I did, recognize, relying on, a certain amount degree of faith that I have is that it's not my plan,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Kind of just slap you across the face and say it's not your plan. Pay attention. There's something bigger going on
Right.
here.
Wow.
And I think that was, that allowed me also to kind of take a step back, try and process that. And I think also, again, as like what you said before of kind of like, okay, you have a seat at the table, and if you've got to act a certain way or be a certain way, and how are you going to deal with what's going on outwardly? What's that going to look like?
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things that I learned, and that someone pointed out to me, and that I've tried to be conscious of, they said you don't have to be a superwoman for Amichai. Like, let him see that you get frustrated. He knows you're great, right? He knows like,
Yeah.
you're going to be there. You're going to power through, or you're going to do what you need to do. But you also have to show him that you get
Yeah.
frustrated. You also have to show him, because he's going to experience frustration. He is experiencing challenges, and he's got to see it from you
Right.
that you get that that's normal. And then how do we react to that? How do we overcome that? But you can also have that moment of, oof, like this is really, really frustrating. This isn't fair. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't any of that. And I think that having that understanding and being, pointed that out and trying to learn that is also a moment of, you can't just put your head down and put your
Yeah.
blinders on. But that point of recognizing those moments of frustration, moments of doubt, that's part of that whole process of, which is better than powering through. Because
Yeah.
then you come out of it and you're like, you understand a little bit more about yourself, and then you can understand how you're going to approach a different, a situation that brings similar challenges, or maybe not similar challenges, but that feeling of, what am I going to do? And you're going to fall down again. You're going to fall down again and again and again. Like I said, sometimes the solution is just get up, dust yourself off, and go.
Yeah.
And other times it's
It's not.
sit with it for
Yeah.
a second, and say, I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated, this is hard for me.
It's so interesting because I set the standard for myself of like we'll call it powering through, but then the way when you're talking about being a mom, I don't have kids, but I would never want to emulate just that, like you're saying. Like I wouldn't want that to be the example. So that gives me a lot to think about right now
Yeah,
because
because then the example is, well, she can clearly handle, even
yeah,
though you can't, and you know for
yeah,
yourself that you can't,
yeah,
right? But then that example is being set, and maybe a bar being put
yeah,
unrealistically high for no reason, because that's just not
yeah.
reality.
100%. Okay. So obviously, this is a podcast by women for women. And so I want to take a moment, my last question, to highlight your grandmother and her mother. And, you share about how they impacted you. So can you talk to me a little bit about how these strong women, helped you become the woman you are today?
Well, my great grandmother, I never knew. I carry her. My middle name is her name, Sarah. And obviously, my grandmother. Thank God, I grew up with my grandparents and was very close with them. And they were just, from what I knew about my great grandmother, Bubby. She was just this strong woman who just didn't break. She did not break. And I saw that very clearly in my grandmother as well, going through what she went through in her life. And they were a huge inspiration in a positive way of this is what potentially strong women look
Yeah.
like. But also again looking at, well, they powered through certain things
Yeah.
that maybe they shouldn't have powered through,
Right.
and how did that affect them in their life? So it's always kind of drawing on that strength, and I've learned to see the positive in it, but also in those moments of doubt when you're saying, why can't I just be strong enough? Why can't I just be like them? Saying, well, is that the healthiest thing to do in those
Right.
moments? Like I said, I couldn't power through having a child with special needs. You can't power through that. Um, and you can't put your head down and just go to work. It doesn't work like that. So it's drawing on the strength and trying to take those positive values and also seeing how I interpret that in my own life. Trying to be strong, trying to be a good parent, a good coach, a good partner. What does that all mean? What does that strength mean to me?
Yeah, I love that because it's not copy paste, right? They lived in a different time, they had different
Yeah.
circumstances, but it's about being able to look at things with analytical eye and choosing for yourself what works. And I think it really ties back to what you're saying earlier. Like, this is important for you to share about Amichai, but he's going to grow up and he's going to have his own version of that, his own narrative, and decide what's important for him. And it's the same concept of looking at, okay, this is my mom and she needed to do this, but this is what I got to do? So I think that's really cool, the
Yeah.
parallel there.
Yeah, and I see it also, with I have my great grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, is an extremely strong woman, but in such a different way.
Yeah.
And how she reacts to things and how she is able, the challenges that she faces, how she handles them are very different from her mother and her grandmother. But that strength is what's there, and how do we define it
Yeah.
for each of us in our generation, what you said, and what we personally face
Yeah.
at this time.
Yeah. And that's the theme of this podcast, it seems like, right? Like, not finding your own version of strength and finding what works for you and not
Yeah,
looking at it as something that you're lacking, but more your ability, not the disability. So it's
yeah,
throughout the whole
exactly.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, thank you so much for coming on today.
thanks for having me.
I love the conversation about sports because I love the conversation about leadership, but obviously sharing your story about your son, but your journey as a mother through having your son, I think is just an incredible way for women and young girls to learn about themselves and how they see the world and how they see other people. And so I truly am grateful that you are so open and vulnerable. And I know I don't think you're doing the blog post anymore, but it's still up there. And it's just, I read through all of it and it's just
Yeah.
really heartwarming. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here, and I would just add that it's not only what's impacted me is also Amichai. I've changed and hopefully learned for the better because of what he showed me and what he's taught me, and that's also something that I'm hopefully able to bring into the realm of coaching. It's not a one-way street. It's
Right.
it's being able to be impacted and learn from the people that are different. They have different perspectives. They have different experiences, and I think that's really important. It doesn't matter if you're the parent or the child, the
Yeah.
coach or the player, whatever it is. That's an opportunity to learn, and hopefully being something that you didn't know before.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you so much, Liz.